What's going on, everybody? Earlier today on NBA Today, the panel dove into a really interesting discussion about the Los Angeles Lakers, and let me tell you, it stirred up a lot of reaction. The main theme was simple but powerful. This front office is in full win-now mode. After Luka Doncic locked in that long-term extension, the conversation shifted to how aggressive the Lakers are planning to be on the trade market, with Andrew Wiggins' name at the center of those talks, along with a handful of other potential targets. Now, the sense on the show was that the Lakers' vision is clear. They believe Luka and LeBron James can absolutely be the two leaders who guide this team back to championship contention. But for that vision to become reality, Rob Pelinka has to hold up his end of the bargain. He has to find a way to upgrade the roster, whether that's with a big move now or a well-timed trade later. And if there's one general manager in the league you expect to keep working the phones until the last possible moment, it's Rob Pelinka. The panel pointed out that he has a track record. He's made trades in nearly every season since taking over, always searching for ways to tweak and improve. They even joked that he's basically the GM for trade YouTubers because if a deal is out there, Pelinka will sniff it out. But here's where it gets interesting. While Pelinka has that reputation for making deals, the panel highlighted how he's also learned to be more patient over the years. He doesn't just jump at the first opportunity anymore. Instead, he lets the market develop, waits for prices to come down, and then pounces. And historically, his best work has come at the trade deadline. That's when we've seen him pull off the moves that actually shape the Lakers into real contenders. So, the expectation is that if something major does happen, it's more likely closer to February than September. Still, there's a reason this conversation is happening now. Training camp is right around the corner, and ideally, you want to have your roster intact heading into it. Your stars, your starting five, your rotation. You want that stability from day one. If a trade happens mid-season, it usually ends up being more of a complementary piece, like adding a bench scorer, a defensive wing, or an extra shooter to balance the roster. Think of the way the Lakers have added players like Malik Monk in past years. Smaller moves that bring real value without shaking up the entire team. But the panel also warned not to underestimate the Lakers' ability to surprise. Some of the biggest deals we've seen from this front office came completely out of nowhere. Sure, the Rui Hachimura deal or the D'Angelo Russell trade were well documented, but then you have other moves, like the Dorian Finney-Smith acquisition, that blindsided the entire league. At one point, it looked like Finney-Smith was on his way to Memphis, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, the Lakers had swooped in. That's Pelinka's style, moving quietly, then striking when the timing is right. They reminded viewers that his last true off-season trade came a few seasons ago when he acquired Patrick Beverley. Since then, most of the heavy lifting has happened either in December or at the deadline. And if not for certain off-season pickups this year, like DeAndre Ayton being available on a buyout or Marcus Smart landing in LA, Pelinka probably would have already made another trade to cover those gaps. There were even reports that a deal involving Matisse Thybulle and Robert Williams was seriously discussed. Those talks didn't materialize, but it shows you that the Lakers are always in the middle of something. So, where does that leave us now? The sense from NBA Today was that while a blockbuster might not be imminent, the Lakers remain one of the most active teams in trade conversations league-wide. There's always a smokescreen, always another layer with this front office. And if the right opportunity comes along before training camp, or if another team's asking price suddenly drops, Pelinka won't hesitate to act. The Lakers' strategy this offseason has been deliberate and cautious. After finalizing the Marcus Smart trade, the front office has taken a step back to evaluate whether pursuing another defensive-minded wing is truly necessary. The logic is simple. If Smart can already replicate some of the qualities that a player like Matisse Thybulle or even another mid-tier wing defender would bring, does it really make sense to sacrifice more draft capital and depth for someone who might overlap with what's already in place? From that perspective, the Lakers appear to be leaning toward one of two approaches. Either they hold steady and allow Smart to anchor the backcourt defense alongside their current rotation, or they bypass the middle-tier options entirely and focus on securing a higher-impact player. This is where the name Andrew Wiggins continues to resurface, despite trade chatter surrounding him going completely silent just a month ago. In fact, some insiders predicted this exact scenario. As training camp approaches, rumors often return to life. Teams across the league prefer to enter camp with their rosters as close to finalized as possible. But it's also a period when front offices reassess situations. Rebuilding teams wait to see how their young players look before committing to a full teardown, while contenders use camp to evaluate chemistry and decide if their current mix can truly contend. If the answer is no, conversations about reshuffling the roster begin. That explains why Wiggins' name is back in the cycle. For the Lakers, the possibility of a trade in the next 2 weeks can't be ruled out. History shows that when things seem calmest, when reports surface saying the front office is comfortable with the roster, that's often when Rob Pelinka makes a surprising move. Just last season, after statements about standing pat and being content, trades involving Dorian Finney-Smith and even larger move followed almost immediately. The real question, however, is whether Wiggins is actually viewed by the Lakers as a needle mover. If they believed he was the missing piece to push this team over the top, the trade likely would have already happened, regardless of the cost. Instead, there seems to be internal debate about just how much of an upgrade he represents over Rui Hachimura. On paper, Wiggins offers superior athleticism, defensive versatility, and the ability to guard multiple positions, traits that Hachimura hasn't consistently provided. But if Rui continues to develop and carve out his role effectively, the marginal benefit of adding Wiggins might not justify the assets required. This is why there's a sense of comfort within the organization about starting the season with the current group. Allowing things to play out naturally could provide clarity. If Hachimura or another role player takes a leap, the urgency to chase Wiggins diminishes. And if issues emerge, Los Angeles can revisit the trade market closer to the deadline, when teams are often more motivated to deal. There's also the possibility of solving the small forward dilemma by committee. Players like Marcus Smart, Jake LaRavia, Jared Vanderbilt, and Hachimura himself could rotate through the role depending on matchup, creating a collective answer rather than relying on a single star acquisition. This flexibility could prove valuable over the course of a long season. Another angle to consider is that the Lakers' most pressing need may not even be at the wing position. If scoring depth off the bench becomes the primary concern, the front office might pivot entirely and target a shot creator, someone in the mold of Malik Monk, who previously thrived in Los Angeles. That kind of addition could end up having just as much, if not more, impact than trading for Wiggins. Ultimately, the Lakers are keeping their options open. While Wiggins remains a name to monitor, the team's decision-makers appear focused on maintaining flexibility, gauging internal growth, and positioning themselves to strike when the right opportunity presents itself. At some point, every front office has to make a decision about how long they're willing to wait before striking. For the Lakers, the path forward may very well come down to patience versus opportunity. On one hand, they can allow the roster to breathe, see how training camp unfolds, and evaluate whether they are a top-tier contender, a middle-of-the-pack team, or perhaps still a piece away. On the other hand, there's the option of moving quickly if the right situation presents itself, especially if the belief grows inside the organization that Andrew Wiggins, or another similar caliber player, could be the missing link. Rob Pelinka's challenge is convincing another team that now is the right moment to deal. That could mean asking a franchise like Miami, who may value financial flexibility, whether holding on to a pricey contract truly makes sense. Or it could mean approaching a team like Charlotte, where multiple young forwards are vying for minutes, and suggesting that moving off someone like Miles Bridges might be the best way to clear developmental space for their prospect. These are the kinds of pitches that often lead to unexpected trades, moves that aren't necessarily about star power, but about aligning incentives between two very different organizations. Of course, there's also the wild card factor. The NBA landscape is constantly shifting, and disgruntled stars emerge almost every few weeks. A player who isn't even being discussed today could suddenly be at the center of trade talks tomorrow. That's why it's entirely possible that the Lakers are already having conversations we don't know about, targeting names that haven't been floated in the rumor mill. Historically, Los Angeles has thrived on these types of out-of-nowhere moves, swooping in when the opportunity is right and surprising the league. Another element that has shifted the Lakers' approach is the Luka Doncic extension. Locking him up long-term changed the calculus for this front office. The biggest concern had been securing Luka's future, and with that settled, the Lakers now have greater incentive to take bigger swings. Knowing their superstar is committed for years to come gives Pelinka and his staff the flexibility and the urgency to be more aggressive without the looming fear of instability. Still, there's a fine line between patience and passivity. Pelinka's cautious approach has served the team well in the past, but at some point, he will need to identify that opportunistic trade and act decisively. The goal is to enter training camp with as close to a finished roster as possible, so that by the time the trade deadline comes around, adjustments are minor rather than seismic. Instead of scrambling for a new starter who needs time to build chemistry, the Lakers would only need to address secondary issues, perhaps adding a backup big if someone like Jackson Hayes doesn't pan out, or bringing in extra depth at a position of need. That's the balancing act for Los Angeles right now. Keep the patience that has worked, but be ready to pounce when the right player, the right price, and the right timing align. On today's edition of NBA Today, the conversation naturally circled back to one name that just won't go away in these trade discussions: Andrew Wiggins. His future has become one of the most talked about questions as we get closer to training camp, and the Los Angeles Lakers have been mentioned time and time again as a team with genuine interest. According to what was brought up on the show, the Lakers still view Wiggins as one of their preferred targets, somebody who could realistically elevate their roster balance, especially on the wing. And there was a sense of urgency behind the way this was discussed. Ideally, Los Angeles would love to secure a deal sooner, rather than dragging it into mid-season chaos. But then the reality sets in. What's the actual price tag? This is where the conversation really started to pick up. Reports have suggested that the Lakers' overall approach has shifted over the last few months. Earlier in the summer, before Luka Doncic signed his extension, there was a lot of hesitation about committing future salary and long-term money. The front office wanted to stay flexible, protect future cap space, and wait until they knew Luka's decision before making their big move. Now, as was highlighted on the program, things have changed. With Luka locked in long-term, Los Angeles is far more incentivized to accelerate their timeline, to press down on the gas, and explore moves that could immediately reshape their roster around LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and Luka. And that's where Wiggins comes in. There's no denying his fit, length, defense, playoff experience, and the ability to slide into different roles depending on what the lineup needs. The question is whether the Lakers can land him without overpaying. No trade is better than a bad trade, and that exact phrase came up on the show. The Lakers have to walk the line carefully. They can't simply give away assets to make a splash, but if the right deal materializes, there's no doubt Wiggins would be the type of player who could push them closer to contention. Now, one detail that was really emphasized today is the financial angle on Miami's side. The Heat are facing some tough decisions. Clearing $30 million plus off their books next season has value in itself, and the Lakers know that. Miami has also been linked to Norman Powell and discussions about a possible new extension, which only adds to the pressure on their books. So yes, there is a very real incentive for the Heat to move Wiggins if the right return comes along. According to reporting that was cited on NBA Today, specifically from Evan Sideri, there's already movement on this front. The Lakers and Heat have in fact reopened trade talks centered on Andrew Wiggins as training camp approaches. Los Angeles has made it clear they're willing to include Dalton Knecht, their most recent first-round pick, along with the necessary expiring salary to make the money work. But here's the sticking point. Miami wants a future first-round pick in the package. That's where everything seems to be stalling right now. And this is where the debate got interesting. Should the Lakers really be putting a first-round pick on the table at this stage? Some argued that Los Angeles would be better off negotiating around swaps or multiple seconds, keeping their first intact unless Miami comes down from their stance. But others pointed out that if the Lakers can preserve Rui Hachimura in the deal, a player Miami reportedly has interest in, then attaching a first-round pick becomes more justifiable. In other words, it depends on the structure. If Rui is involved, it makes sense for Los Angeles to be hesitant about also sacrificing a first. If Rui can be kept out of the deal, then maybe you sweeten the pot with that extra pick to finally get something done. And let's not overlook the long-term implications here. If Rui does stay, he has to be fully committed to his role. He would likely come off the bench this season and maybe next, unless circumstances change with LeBron's eventual departure or a major roster shift. That was part of the conversation today too, making sure Hachimura is both willing and comfortable to embrace that role, because we've seen him struggle when he feels marginalized in the past. If he's locked in mentally, then Los Angeles has more reason to hold on to him and instead part with the first-rounder. From there, the panel broke down the mechanic. Rui's contract sits at $18.5 million, Connect at just over $4 million, and that leaves the Lakers still needing to send out another $6+ million to make the math work. That's where names like Gabe Vincent or Maxi Kleber came up. Miami in particular would be very interested in bringing back Vincent, a player who was excellent for them during his stint in South Beach. That potential reunion makes sense for both sides. So the framework of the deal is becoming clearer, even if it hasn't crossed the finish line yet. Rui Hachimura, Dalton Neck, and an additional salary piece like Gabe Vincent, with the big question still hanging over everything being whether or not Los Angeles attaches that first-round pick Miami is demanding. That's the negotiation happening right now, and it's why this story continues to gather steam as camp gets closer. As the discussion continued on NBA Today, the panel dug even deeper into the tug-of-war between the Lakers and the Heat, because the central question is still the same. What exactly will it take to get Miami to say yes? The framework we've been hearing involves Rui Hachimura, Dalton Knecht, and potentially a player like Gabe Vincent, whose return would actually make a lot of sense for Miami. He knows their system, he fits their culture, and on an expiring deal, he would give them the ability to remain competitive while still keeping long-term flexibility intact. That kind of package checks several boxes. But is it enough? That was the sticking point raised on the show. From Los Angeles' perspective, they'd be getting Andrew Wiggins, a player who immediately fills their biggest roster need, while still having room to fill that 15th roster spot later. But from Miami's side, Connect alone isn't enough to move the needle. The question is whether Rui plus Connect plus another rotational piece is finally sufficient incentive. And that's where the panel's opinions began to split. Some voices argued that this exact structure could get the deal done by the time training camp begins. Others countered that Miami is going to hold firm, wait things out, and force the Lakers to sweat before making any real concession. And honestly, that might be the reality. Even though Los Angeles is motivated to get this wrapped up before camp, the Heat have leverage in the sense that they don't need to trade Wiggins immediately. They can play hardball, they can stretch this out, and they can let the season itself shape Wiggins' market value. On the program today, that point was emphasized. If the Lakers truly believed Andrew Wiggins was the missing piece, the move that instantly puts them on par with Boston, Denver, or Milwaukee, then this deal would already be finished. The fact that it hasn't been finalized signals at least some hesitation in Los Angeles. Either they see him as a helpful piece, but not the piece, or they're strategically waiting for Miami's demands to soften. That doesn't mean the interest isn't real. Wiggins is still the name most frequently described as the Lakers' top preference. He fits the profile perfectly. Playoff-tested, versatile on defense, capable of sliding between roles, and a wing who can guard multiple positions while spacing the floor. But even if the Lakers land him, it doesn't instantly solve everything. And that's the bigger dilemma, because it forces Rob Pelinka and the front office to weigh short-term upgrades against the cost of sacrificing too much draft capital or too many rotation players. Timing, once again, became a key part of the conversation. Ideally, Los Angeles would like to have Wiggins in camp from day one. That way, he'd have time to develop chemistry with Luka Doncic, Austin Reeves, LeBron James, and DeAndre Ayton. That potential starting five, Luka, Reeves, Wiggins, LeBron, and Ayton, was described on the show as one of the best on paper in all of basketball. But, as the analysts reminded us, paper doesn't always translate into championships. Talent has to mesh, roles have to be accepted, and egos have to be managed. And that led to another crucial layer: role acceptance. Is Andrew Wiggins ready to be the fifth option on a roster like this? Can he embrace nights where his stat line is closer to 8 points on limited attempts, instead of being the second or third scorer? Can Austin Reeves, who has been talked up as the potential third option in LA, accept sliding down to a fourth role if Wiggins emerges as more reliable offensively? And what about DeAndre Ayton, a player who still sees himself as a go-to guy, but who would often have to defer behind LeBron, Luka, and possibly even Reeves? These are the dynamics that make the Lakers' situation so delicate. On the surface, yes, you want as much talent as possible, but internally, you need those players to buy in, to sacrifice, and to lock into roles that aren't always glamorous. That's why, as the panel emphasized, having Wiggins in camp from the very beginning could be invaluable. The sooner you get these guys on the floor together, the sooner you can establish hierarchy, build chemistry, and work through the inevitable growing pain. Still, the idea of waiting until the trade deadline isn't off the table. And that was a point made loud and clear. It wouldn't be the end of the world if Los Angeles played the first half of the season with the roster they have now, assessed how their bench is performing, and then revisited Wiggins later. Because while Wiggins might ultimately prove to be the difference between making the finals and falling short, no one wants to see the Lakers overpay for him right now. The risk of giving up too much and leaving the roster too thin is very real. That's the tension playing out in these negotiations. The Lakers clearly want Wiggins. The Heat know it, and they're testing just how badly Los Angeles wants to make this move before camp. And the Lakers, for now, are holding back just enough to avoid looking desperate. The Lakers' pursuit of Andrew Wiggins brings up an important question. How much of an upgrade would he truly be compared to what Los Angeles already has in place? When you look at Rui Hachimura, Jared Vanderbilt, and even younger depth pieces like Dalton Knecht, the conversation becomes less about replacing talent and more about maximizing fit. Rui, for example, has grown into a reliable scoring option at the 4 who can occasionally slide to the 3, but his defensive ceiling isn't close to what Wiggins provides. That's where the real separation lies. Wiggins has proven throughout his career, and most notably during Golden State's championship run, that he can guard positions 2 through 4 with confidence, switch seamlessly, and take on the opponent's toughest wing assignment. His blend of size, length, and athleticism gives him a versatility that the Lakers sorely lack in their starting unit. On offense, he doesn't represent a downgrade either. While Rui can give you buckets as a mid-range and spot-up threat, Wiggins adds the ability to create his own shot, attack off the dribble, and even facilitate in spurts. In essence, the Lakers wouldn't be sacrificing scoring to get him. They'd simply be adding a more complete two-way piece. But as with any trade scenario, the sticking point comes down to cost. Is Wiggins better than Rui alone? Absolutely, and in a meaningful way. Is he worth Rui plus Knecht, Gabe Vincent, and a first-round pick? That's where hesitation is understandable. At some point, the incremental value he brings doesn't justify stripping the roster of too much depth and future flexibility. That's why Los Angeles has to play this carefully, searching for middle ground, perhaps negotiating pick swaps instead of outright firsts, or packaging second-round assets rather than overextending. Another layer to consider is chemistry. Plugging in Wiggins doesn't automatically solve every issue. Yes, he fits multiple positions and addresses defensive concerns, but the Lakers will still need to shore up their bench and keep balance across the roster. If, however, acquiring him is paired with signing proven veterans, names like Al Horford or DeAnthony Melton have been floated, then the picture changes entirely. Adding Wiggins alongside steady depth pieces could elevate Los Angeles from a fringe contender to a legitimate threat in the West. Timing also plays a critical role here. With training camp right around the corner, both the Warriors and Lakers may feel increased urgency to finalize rosters. Golden State's front office is facing pressure with multiple players reportedly growing restless about their situation, and that could open the door for Los Angeles to strike at a more favorable price. From the Lakers' perspective, locking in a two-way wing before the season starts could be the final piece of the puzzle to complement LeBron James and Anthony Davis. In the end, this comes down to calculated risk. Wiggins isn't just a name, he's a proven playoff performer who has already thrived in a championship environment. But the Lakers have to decide how far they're willing to go without mortgaging too much of their future or disrupting the depth they've worked to build. If Rob Pelinka can find that balance, Wiggins could be the type of acquisition that raises the team's ceiling without breaking the foundation. What we saw on Sportcenter today was a fascinating conversation about the roster puzzle facing both the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers. The Knicks, as reported on the show, have made some recent signings, Landry Shamet and Malcolm Brogdon, to strengthen their core and round out their depth. But with those moves comes a very real financial complication. Because New York is hard-capped at the second apron, they only have the space to bring in one veteran on a minimum contract. That means a decision is coming quickly. Either the Knicks will have to choose between Shamet and Brogdon, or they'll need to create flexibility by making a salary dump type trade. Now, the discussion turned toward how the Lakers might be able to step into this situation. Los Angeles is in an interesting position themselves. They have needs, particularly when it comes to bolstering the roster with reliable depth, but they don't have the salary structure to simply absorb a contract. So, any realistic scenario would likely require a third team to get involved. Still, the Knicks do have pieces that could make sense for the Lakers. And during the program, one name kept coming up: Mitchell Robinson. Robinson, we were reminded, has been floated in trade conversations before. The Knicks had discussions at the trade deadline, and again earlier in the offseason, about potentially moving on from him. Questions remain about how he fits long-term in New York, especially with the recent additions of front-court players who can stretch the floor and play within a modern five-out system. With Karl Anthony Towns already on the roster, and even Gershon Yabusele as a versatile big who can provide minutes inside, New York may be more open to reshaping its center rotation. That's where the Lakers enter the picture. On the show, there was talk of a possible framework. Robinson's contract is just under $13 million, and if the Knicks packaged him with someone like Tyler Kolek, their young guard on a cheap deal, that gets close to $15 million in outgoing salary. A construction like that could line up with a package from the Lakers centered around Gabe Vincent, and another piece, perhaps a pick or even someone like Dalton Knecht, while a third team, maybe the Nets for example, could be brought in to take on a younger player or to balance salaries. The idea here isn't that Los Angeles would be rushing to make such a move. As was emphasized in the discussion, backups at the center position don't usually swing playoff series. By the time the postseason arrives, your starter is logging 35 minutes a night, and those backup minutes shrink to maybe 8 or 9, with the rest filled by small ball lineup. But the Lakers could look at this as an opportunity to both clear salary and add a piece that fits a specific role, while also taking advantage of New York's roster crunch. And this is where the intrigue really lies. New York doesn't have unlimited assets to simply dump salary. We've seen other teams try this approach, Dallas and Miami for instance, and the rest of the league knows the leverage is on their side. If you're going to ask another team to take on a contract, it comes at a cost. That cost could be attaching young players with upside, like Kolek or one of their other developmental pieces, rather than draft picks that the Knicks may not want to part with. So the scenario discussed on Sportcenter is essentially this. The Knicks have put themselves in a bind by signing both Shamet and Brogdon. The Lakers are a team looking for creative ways to improve the roster, and a third team could become the key to making it all work. It's the kind of layered trade talk that highlights just how difficult managing the cap and roster construction can be when two franchises with championship ambitions find themselves pressed up against financial restrictions. Let's take this from a wider perspective. If the Lakers were able to pull off a deal, sending out Gabe Vincent, Dalton Knecht, and a second-round pick in exchange for Mitchell Robinson, they'd not only be acquiring a proven defensive anchor, but they'd also be clearing close to $4 million in salary and opening a roster spot. That's no small thing, especially when you consider the kind of veterans still sitting on the market, waiting for clarity before training camp. Reports earlier in the summer suggested that several free agents with interest in the Warriors have grown increasingly impatient, realizing that if Golden State doesn't make a move, they could be left without a team. That's exactly where the Lakers could pounce. By adding Robinson while also freeing up money and roster spots, Los Angeles could position itself to sign one or two of those veteran pieces, whether it's DeAnthony Melton, Al Horford, or another experienced role player. Imagine walking into camp not just with Robinson, but also with another steady veteran in the mix. Suddenly, the Lakers' depth looks a lot different. And here's the thing. Nobody is saying the Lakers must panic about the center position. Jackson Hayes showed last season that he can fill regular season minutes without being a liability. On nights when a starter is resting, Hayes can step in, give energy, run the floor, and hold his own. He may not be a playoff-caliber starter, but he's serviceable. Pairing him with Luka Doncic, for example, in certain lineups, could even bring out the best in him. The issue isn't whether Hayes can contribute. It's whether the Lakers want to rely solely on him when the postseason rolls around. That's why a move for Robinson makes sense. Yes, he comes with injury concerns. That's part of the risk. But you're acquiring him in a deal that also doubles as a salary dump, which the Lakers have been actively seeking. From that angle, the downside is limited. You're not mortgaging the future, you're using expendable pieces to bring in a potential defensive game-changer while setting yourself up to add even more help. And if the Lakers did all that, it could change their entire trade calculus. Imagine a scenario where Robinson is added, the cap flexibility is opened, and suddenly, Los Angeles can pivot back to the Andrew Wiggins conversation. Now you're talking about a potential roster featuring Wiggins, Mitchell Robinson, and possibly veterans like Horford or Melton. That type of depth and versatility could completely reshape the Lakers' outlook. At that point, you're not just talking about patchwork moves, you're talking about a roster that can legitimately go 10 or 11 players deep come playoff time. Think about it. Wiggins and Robinson could be part of a starting five on plenty of teams around the league, yet on this version of the Lakers, they might not even have to carry that full burden. That's the type of rotation that allows a team to survive injuries, manage minutes, and stay fresh for the postseason grind. In other words, what looks like a small shuffle on paper, Vincent, Knecht, and a second-round pick, could set off a domino effect that leaves the Lakers with arguably their deepest roster in years. When you really think about it, the appeal of Mitchell Robinson for the Lakers is obvious. This is someone who has already proven he can deliver in the postseason, showing real value for New York in playoff moments. Adding that kind of rim protector and rebounder instantly checks one of the Lakers' biggest needs. And here's the kicker. Robinson wouldn't come at the cost of the team's most valuable trade chip. Rui Hachimura, Austin Reeves, or even Maxi Kleber would remain on the roster, giving Los Angeles options to keep building if another opportunity, like an Andrew Wiggins trade, presented itself. From the Knicks' perspective, they've backed themselves into a corner. They either need to sacrifice one of the new contracts they just handed out, or make a trade that usually costs draft capital, assets they don't have in abundance. That's where the Lakers could step in. By offering Vincent, Knecht, and a second-rounder, Los Angeles not only gives New York the financial flexibility and roster spot they need, but they also land Robinson without touching their premium assets. It's the kind of move that makes sense for both sides, especially with Brooklyn lurking as a third team, eager to stockpile young players and draft picks. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Robinson's contract is expiring. If things don't work out, the Lakers still maintain long-term flexibility. In the short term, though, his presence completely reshapes their front court rotation. Jackson Hayes, instead of being the second option, slides into a more comfortable third spot. On nights when Robinson sits due to his injury history, Hayes can step in and soak up minutes. But in the playoffs, Robinson gives Los Angeles something it hasn't truly had in years: a consistent rim protector and shot blocker who can swing a series. Put all that together, and you see why this scenario deserves real exploration. It's low risk, potentially high reward, and it doesn't stop the Lakers from continuing to chase bigger names. Imagine a depth chart where Robinson is anchoring the paint, Wiggins is on the wing, and veterans like Al Horford or DeAnthony Melton are filling gaps. That's not just plugging holes, that's a full-scale roster upgrade. And of course, this is the kind of move that sparks debate. Should the Lakers go all in on Robinson despite the injury risks? Or should they hold out and aim higher later in the season? That's where the discussion begins.